Hey there! In this video I'm going to show and explain the drawing process of this picture of an underwater Pokemon party. I made this as the special drawing for my tutorial video about underwater bubbles. If you're interested in learning how to draw these, then you can watch that video later too. Alright then, let us start. At first I sketched out the rocks of the coral reef. The position and shape of these will determine later where the Pokemon and corals will be placed and also the general composition. I chose a vertical format for this picture so that I can show all the depth layers from the water surface to the bottom of the coral reef. I sketched out these rocks in kind of a sharply segmented way. Later during the rendering, these edges will be more softened and texturized. Next up we have the sketch for the heart bubble with the star of the party. Now I'm not talking about the Pokemon Staryu, but of a musician called Kristi. Later in this video I will tell you more about her. For now we focus on the sketching process. Her pose was just simply supposed to look like she's floating. I kept the style very cartoonish, so she fits in better with the Pokemon around her. Also, I almost made a mistake and made her left-handed. Good that I checked beforehand and found out that her camera on stream is inverted. Moving on to the Pokemon, of which there are a lot. Of course, I used plenty of references for this drawing. Luckily, most Pokemon are drawn with very simple shapes, so sketching them out in different poses wasn't all that hard. All of these flat top surfaces of the rocks are now getting occupied. The coral reef is supposed to get really busy, so there are quite a few of these water Pokemon. Important was also that I kept the perspective in mind. Obviously, we would look at the Pokemon that swim further up from below, and vice versa. At this point, I had already planned out who is going to blow some bubbles and left out some space for them. You know, drawing Pokemon is just so much fun. There are so many of them at this point, so this environment can have such a wide variety of different Pokemon. In my underwater bubble tutorial, I already explained how to shape and paint these bubbles. Normally it's not even really necessary to make sketches for them, but in this case I wanted to have an idea for where they are placed and how much space they are going to cover. And you can see that I made a mix of small to large size bubbles. The bubbles that are just getting blown are especially weirdly shaped. Those would then separate into smaller bubbles very quickly. Then I'm sketching out the corals. I never drew corals before, so it was an interesting challenge. I did a little bit of research beforehand and gathered a bunch of reference material of different types of corals, of which there are so many. Seriously, they come in so many different shapes and colors. Really fascinating. Those corals are drawn in between and on the rocks. I just kept on filling out more and more until the complete lower half of the picture was full. Also, I have to say that some of those corals have very complex shapes. I didn't want to overdo it, so I kept most of them fairly simple. Maybe not the most accurate, but oh well, it's not that big of a deal. The main focus is still on Kristi and the Pokemon after all. Only the characters in this picture get some outlining. Everything else will be painted freely. And therefore I kept the outlines fairly simple so that they don't stand out too much. I barely paid any attention to the line weight. Most of the lines have a constant thickness. You can also notice that I left out the shining orbs of the lanterns. And that's because later they will be painted as bright lights, too bright for any lines to be visible. So I'm kinda curious, which Pokemon would you be at this party? I probably would be a Shelder. You know, somebody who just enjoys the music while chilling out in their cozy shell. I think we have a lot of variety of Pokemon that could represent different personality types. So there might be one for everybody that they can relate with. I made sure to use the original colors for the Pokemon, and so you can see me picking them directly from these references. When doing something like this, I still have to be careful to not use an image from the anime that shows different colors, simply because it is from a scene with some kind of filter, like a scene during the night, the sunset, in a cave, etc. However, those colors won't stay that way. Later you will see me apply some filters. Kristi also got some colors, of course. From what I have seen, most of her wardrobe is just black. Her guitar too. So that made coloring pretty simple for me. But of course I wanted to establish some contrast so that not everything is just black. So I used different shades of grey, and her top got a hint of blue. The water background is really simple, just a gradient from light to dark blue. Well, to make it a little bit more interesting, I made the deeper waters a bit more marine blue, and the water close to the surface got a warmer, more yellow-greenish hue. I painted the bubbles pretty much how I showed in my tutorial video. The center of the bubbles is the darkest part in this case, just a choice of style. And the colors are pretty much the same as those of the water background. They were still kept quite simple because there are a lot, and I didn't want to waste tons of hours on tiny details. I also made sure that the deeper bubbles appear a bit darker. All of these clusters haven't spread out all that much yet, so you can imagine that all of these Pokemon blew them at about the same time. The large heart-formed air bubble that surrounds Kristi and enables her to breathe is especially stylized looking. In this case, I cared more about making it look nice rather than realism. Normally there would also be some kind of distortion because of the light transition between water and air, but I didn't want any distortion, so I left it out. As simple as that. In the work that you create with your art, you can do whatever you want. I also played around with a couple of wave shapes to make the bubble even more interesting looking. I gave the rocks the base colors. As placeholders they got different shades so that I can distinguish them better. And then I moved on to the coral rendering. I just roughly guessed the colors from the references I saw and cared more about establishing a decent contrast and texture. It was actually quite enjoyable painting them. They have so many cool shapes. I experimented a lot with different ways to paint them, used a bunch of brushes that I normally don't use, with varying results. Painting the corals was definitely the most time-consuming part. And since I don't really know what else to say about this painting process, let me tell you more about Kristi. As I already told you, she's a musician. To be more precise, she streams on Twitch several times a week. The guitar and her singing voice are her main instruments, but she also plays a couple of other instruments like the piano. One really fun thing that she does is making looper songs. She records herself singing a melody or playing an instrument, and then the song loops around with that new recording. She repeats that process and keeps on adding more and more tracks to the loop, always changing the instrument. It's really cool to see and hear how the song builds up. And then at the end she sings normally to what she recorded, and it's always so cool. She also has tons of animations and scenes for the streams, all of them assembled by her. Her stream has a bunch of very unique characters, like alpacas, porgs, robots, and so on. There is always so much amazing and silly stuff going on. Also, she plays so many different songs. Her song list of covers and original songs is crazy long. And very importantly, she is a really nice person. You know, I have been watching Twitch streams for quite a while at this point. But a few years ago, I basically was never active in any stream chat. I was just a lurker, all the time. However, she and the other people in the lovely community that she built up were so welcoming and friendly towards me from the very beginning that I started to get more comfortable with writing something in chat, even if it's just a simple "hey" often a time. Of course, it was also thanks to a couple of other really friendly streamers. But Kristi's stream certainly played a huge role. So if you haven't checked out her streams yet, please do so. I'm sure you won't regret it. You'll find the link to her Twitch channel in the description. I also want to explain what gave me the idea for this painting. Well, two things. Firstly, she likes to add some Pokemon to her stream, including Woopers and Mantines that you can see here in this picture. And secondly, she has this Twitch emote that also looks like a heart-shaped bubble with water waves inside of it, which is based on an original song of hers. So yeah, that idea just seemed so perfect for her. I actually had this idea for over half a year until I finally was able to paint it. Now here is the part where I apply some filters and change the colors of the corals. Over the whole project I put a color balance filter. I use color correction layers for that purpose. They are super convenient because you can change and revert the settings at any point. Now the thing is, I actually looked up how different light wavelengths get absorbed by water. I found out that reds especially get filtered out. Therefore I shifted the colors away from red. The corals got their own color correction layers, and I even went in and changed some values for individual coral types. Next up I did the rendering for the rocks. The sketches I did earlier once again come in handy so that I can tell how I planned out the different surfaces. I made sure that in the end the rocks don't look too angular though. They are underwater, sharp corners would normally erode away. The average brightness of these different rock surfaces depends on the orientation. The more it's pointing up, the brighter it is, as simple as that. These rocks need some texture too, of course. To make them look less boring, I kind of added some small steps on those surfaces so that they don't look too flat. In addition to the color balance filter, I also included a simple blue fill layer at the top and set it to multiply with a low opacity. An easy way to shift all the colors more towards a specific color you want. It is okay if everything looks very blue and a bit boring therefore right now, because the lantern's light will bring in more color to the picture. I added more texture to the rocks by taking some colors and using some texturized brushes. I just lightly painted it on, only making sure that it doesn't get too much. I gave Kristi some shading and highlighting. Once again, I kept it fairly simple and didn't create that strong of a contrast. The hair and guitar had to be the shiniest. Also changed the line color of the strings. And then the Pokemon also got some rendering. I use multiply layers with colored shades and not just plain grey. Giving your shadows some extra color makes the artwork so much more interesting looking. I feel like I'm saying this every single time, but it is true. Give the water surface some more detail too. It also was the first time for me to paint a water surface from below like that. Looking at the references, I saw that I was able to just paint this pattern, which gets smaller the further away it is. The pattern should still look somewhat chaotic, so the spacing and shapes should vary. At first I painted with white and let it gradually fade out, and then used a darker blue and painted some shades below these waves. And as the last extra touch, I added some faint light rays from the surface, slowly fading out as they go deeper. Then, to add to the shininess of the picture, especially the bubbles, I used some white with an airbrush tool and made the highlights glow a little bit. I used the term bloom effect from computer graphics for this. It is on a top layer, even above the outlining, so it is also able to soften the black outlines that we have here. Now here's the next important step. The lanterns finally get their lights. They are normally illustrated with only yellow lights, but I wanted it to be even more colorful. I used a combination of normal and glow dodge layers. To make the lights look extra bright, they shine with an intense white at the center, and at the borders you can see the actual hue. These lights of course also reflect off the surfaces around them, and so I paint in all of these colored light reflections. I go by one color after another and focus on those objects that are the closest to the lights. Also, I pay attention to the relative orientation of these objects to the colored lights so that these reflections point the right way. Every lantern ended up with a different color to make everything extra colorful. And these colors still go well with the general blue hue of this picture. Red or orange lights wouldn't fit in very well though, so I avoided those. By the way, these colored lights remained unaffected by the filters. This way they stay colorful and intense. Especially the heart-formed Bubble and Kristi are bathed in these colored lights. She is the star of this party after all. I tended to give the characters stronger light reflections than the corals and rocks. The background at the top half looked kind of empty and boring, so I decided to add even more water Pokemon. Those were super quick and easy to draw because they are so far away that you can't see any details. A simple monochrome color was enough. And there was a lot of copying and pasting. Nobody cares if there are a lot of duplicates in the background. Save some work time whenever possible. Can you figure out which Pokemon they are solely based on these silhouettes? Only a few small adjustments missing, like adding a texture over the whole picture, making the Wailord look more three-dimensional, adding a vignette effect, a couple of tiny bubble clusters in the background, and my name tag. And that's it. Here is the finished version once again. This was one of the most enjoyable paintings that I ever made. Not only was it fun to draw, but also looking at it fills me with happiness. I hope it has a similar effect on you. Okay then, as always, you can find all the links down below in the description. Thank you a lot for watching. Have fun drawing, and see you next time.